forward to the discussion that will look further into those interventions and the actions that need to be taken today for a better tomorrow for the majority young people on this continent, who by many standards are also described as our greatest asset. And I'm having that conversation this morning with you all in the room, with everyone who is tuned into CNBC Africa, watching us from all over the world, but also with my esteemed panel who I'd like to introduce to you right now. Starting with Mr. Osman Diagana, sitting right next to me. He is the Vice President of the World Bank for the Western and Central Africa. Good morning, sir. Also, Mr. Mamadou Ndoye, the External Advisory Panel member and former Minister of Education for Senegal. Good day, sir. Seated next to him is Ms. Naloya Leonga Pauline Ebge. She's the Minister of Secondary Education for Cameroon. Good day, ma'am. Also, we heard from him a little earlier this morning. It's great to see you again, once again, sir. Mr. Ken Ofori-Atta, the Minister of Finance for Ghana. And last but not least, we do have Dr. Joanne Obiawe. She is the Commissioner of Education for Edo State in Nigeria. Good day, ma'am. Minister Ofori-Atta, sir, if you can allow me to start with you, not only as host of this conference, but also as the custodian, I suppose, to the financial vault in your country, sir. So we heard from the Vice President about all the things that Ghana has got going on right now in its education system. You have improved the access of quite a number of young people to study at varsity, and you have seen an increase in that. They can now do so for free. You are building quite a number of institutions, STEM institutions, ramping up the digital skills. In fact, we did hear from the Vice President as well that quite a number of your institutions at secondary level have free Wi-Fi. So you've got a lot going. And I imagine that required quite a significant investment. It needed money. And we do know that money right now is also a key constraint in the region in improving educational outcomes. So can you share with your colleagues in the room and the audience watching how Ghana was able to overcome some of the constraints and barriers when it does come to increasing the financial investment into education, sir?
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. And maybe first to thank the World Bank for this forum, and to start with a quotation from our president in 2018, where he stated that any country that aims to transform itself into a modern, productive player in the global marketplace must get its education policies right. As such, we as a government have a sacred duty to our children and to the generations beyond in ensuring that irrespective of their circumstances, their right to education is preserved. So when your president states this, and then you take the oath as Minister of Finance, I think the instructions are quite clear as to the passion that he holds on education, the clarity of social justice and social mobility, and also the clarity that, like most countries, the human capital becomes the most sustaining gift for us. We then start a government in which the president then also, during the campaign, declares that there will be free senior high school education going forward. And the opposition felt very strongly that one could not afford it. But then it comes down, in a sense, to choices because there's never enough resources. So over this period, we have more than tripled the spending in education, over 63 billion of that, and on average spending some 3% of our revenues, GDP, on education. This has resulted in the numerous things that our Vice President mentioned this morning. In effect, we brought about 1.4 million kids now through senior high school who would never have been able to get there. The TVET issue has increased by some 40,000 new students, and the education ministry also keeps pushing the issue of digitalization and computerization to make sure that our students are ready for the future. And I don't think there's ever going to be a time where there will be enough resources to support education. So it comes down once again to a choice and a clarity of what every citizen deserves to have so that their potential will be fully realized for the sustainability of the society. I think one of the truths for all of us in Africa is that our youth population is going to continue growing, and that by 2050 we'll have some 850 million or so youth. And these have to be turned into productive instruments of change for the continent or the world. And that should be, therefore, the orientation in which we all as finance ministers do our allocations as we look at creating prosperity and bringing equity in the resources that we have.
Ma'am, Cameroon's also got a lot going on. You've managed to improve the number of children that are coming into school. I think that perhaps you'd agree with me in that there is plenty of room for improvement, especially when you look at what is happening at the secondary education level. So can you just talk to us about your vision for secondary education in Cameroon right now and the strategy to realize that vision?
Yes, education has increased. At the primary level, we have almost 100% of students who are children who are going to school because education is free. As a result, many of the children are going to school. But come to secondary education. It is good, but it's not that successful. The first thing that we have to say is that what is happening in Cameroon reflects some of the problems, the ugly problems of education in Africa, in the sense that at the primary school level, we have a policy whereby all the students pass to the next class. And so there's no failure. But we have to ask ourselves what happens when you come to secondary education. In secondary education, there is selection. And so it's not everybody who passes simply because you are in there. And the next question is, what happens when only less than 50% of those who leave primary education can get into secondary education? That is a problem which we don't want to happen. But we have to ask ourselves, there is no room, there is no way that in secondary education you can continue a no selection policy. So what happens when free education plus a no selection plus a selection policy, free education plus meet? So all of them cannot pass into secondary education. That is a problem, a real problem. So we have that problem of trying to make sure that those who come into secondary, those who leave primary education can go into secondary education. We're trying to say it cannot We have to look at it. Where is the problem? Is the problem on the type of teaching that is done? Is the problem on curriculum? Where is the problem? Success, yes, but a lot of problem in dealing with those children who do not pass. What happens to the children who do not pass? Where do they go to? There's a problem. Again, we have to ask. Do they go to the other schools that are not very good? Do they fail? Do they repeat? What do you do with repeaters? What happens is that those who pass into secondary school, they fail. They fail from year to year. And then we find that the whole success rate reduces as we move from one year to the other. So there is a problem.
Sure.
And one has to find a solution.
Sure.
To this problem.
Sure. Mr. Nduyesa, you have worn quite a number of hats in the education scene. You have been a minister. You have also worked as head of the teachers union, amongst others. What's your view and your intervention about the key constraints right now when it does come to improving the educational outcomes on the continent, maybe even solving for the challenge in Cameroon right now in their secondary education space?
We need to first talk about the poverty level of the children that come from the grassroots. And these children fundamentally are not able to really be able to read and write right from the primary level. And that becomes a major challenge in terms of improving upon the results at the secondary level. As a result, or from this viewpoint, I believe that talking about improving of the quality of education generally does not really tackle the problem. The problem is to really go to the grassroots of the problem. And the challenge is the acquisition of basic skills in order to be able to really ensure that. And in that respect, we need to focus on what I consider as more essential. That is the process of teaching skills. Now, is this process going on indeed? And are these results reflecting the processes that were engaged? That is the question we need to ask. And at that level, there are two major questions that it begs. Now, are the children ready to learn these skills? And are the teachers ready to teach those skills? If we don't have these two pre-requirements, we will not be able to achieve satisfactory results. However, what we should do in the region is the majority of the children are not prepared to go through the school system and learn the way it ought to be. Secondly, a lot of children have health challenges and nutrition. Thirdly, the teaching language, the language of instruction in schools is not the language that is known by the majority of the children. When they come, as a result, when they come into the school system, they are being taught in a language that they simply just don't know and therefore are not able to digest what is being taught them. As a result, the children are not sufficiently prepared to even learn. And that is one of the fundamental causes of what you are observing today in Cameroon. However, the teachers also have not been properly tooled or trained to teach. And from the viewpoint of the mastery of the curriculum content, there is a high level of deficiency or insufficiency at the level of the teaching. Even though some of the teachers may have even acquired university education, they do not have the skill sets to teach effectively. Also, with respect to the teaching approach, it's even worse. We observed from various assessments that we did, more than 50% of the teachers at the primary level were not teaching using the pedagogical approach that was indicated, and as a result, do not teach effectively. And there, it's a second and major problem, because that is the foundation. As a result, when you look at solutions, it means that we need to have much more pedagogical work that will be done and prepared for the teachers in order for them to be tooled, and also ensuring that the language of instruction should be the language that the children are familiar with, in order to bridge that language gap in teaching. And finally, it is necessary that the teachers be made to review all the pedagogical teaching that was being used. And the system should focus on the basic skills teachings, basic skills sets teaching, and the learning of these skills should be an experiential approach that would enable them focus on the practical aspect that in a way could somehow stem the tide of the insufficiencies and deficiencies that we have observed in Cameroon.
Touching on just what is happening in other parts of the world outside of your country, touching on the situation in Cameroon a bit, and I think just speaking to the fact that the constraints that are faced in the region are not unique to a specific country. When you touched on the challenge around the teaching methods right now and the opportunity for reforming in those methods, when you touched on the language of instruction, quite a contentious issue all over the world as to how long for you teach kids in a language that they understand when you make the switch to those other internationally or universal languages, not unique to Senegal or Cameroon, I think widespread across the region, across the continent, in fact. And Dr. Joanne, I thought that maybe you would be great to make an intervention here, just in terms of what is happening with your program, the Edo Best program in Nigeria, in terms of the interventions that you have been able to make in improving the teaching methods, in using new technologies to improve those methods and also improve those outcomes. Can you just give us a taste of what is happening in your part of the world and how you have been able to achieve those better outcomes?
It's a privilege to be here this morning as the only sub-national government on this very illustrious panel. Yes, in Edo State, we are a state in Nigeria, and in 2018, our governor, His Excellency Governor Godwin Obaseki, launched the Edo Basic Education Sector Transformation, Edo Best. The fulcrum of Edo Best was really about transforming the basic education subsector, because we consider basic education at the time as the foundation of education. And so improving foundational literacy was very important for us in Edo State. Improving teacher performance was very important. Professionalizing the profession was a priority for us. Reducing teacher truancy was also quite important to us. And so in order to do all of this, we had to introduce technology into how we manage our education system at the basic level, as well as bringing technology into the classroom. And so for us, under the Edo Best program in Edo State, we were able to outfit every basic teacher with a tablet. And so with that tablet, we were also able to then centrally develop our lesson plans. So it was very important for us to go the route of scripted lessons, because we found out because of quality assurance, to quality assurance standards across the board. But every teacher essentially developing their own lessons. In an ideal world, that's perfect. But in our challenges that we had to deal with, it became important as a first step to onboarding standards across the board we had to go the route of scripted lessons, and this meant that we used technology to deliver these scripted lessons to our teachers, whether they were in the urban areas, semi-urban schools, rural schools, remote schools, and riverine schools. So at any point of the day during the school hours, all our teachers across all grade levels in our basic schools were teaching the same content. The other thing technology allowed us to do was to essentially improve our accountability system as well as track performance. So with the tablet, teachers were able to, when they come to school in the morning, log in. And with the inbuilt GPS coordinates of the school, it was impossible for a teacher to be at home and claim to be in school. The tablet also allowed us to be able to track lesson preview. So even though the lessons were scripted, the teachers were also expected to spend some time preparing for their lessons. And so we're also able to, using the tablet, to track lesson completion rate. The average class period is about 45 minutes. And so if a teacher is spending 15 minutes to complete a 45 minutes lesson, then that is a red flag. Or if they are not able to finish the lesson within that 45 minutes mark, it was also a red flag. And so with not just introducing technology, we also had to put in place other structures to support the teachers through coaching, through mentoring. So we had different categories of field officers, like the learning and development officers, who went into schools every day and watched the teachers deliver their lessons. And where a teacher was performing below expectation, they had instant support. The quality assurance officers went to school every day as well, and then the social mobilization officers. The last category of field officers were focused on improving parental engagement. Again, we realized that for the reform to work, it has to be a symbiotic relationship between government, the teachers, and the parents and community. So the third category of officers went to communities every day, informed parents about what was going on in our schools, when we are having open day for parents to come into school and meet with their child's teacher. The social mobilization officers were the ones that went out to mobilize teachers. So in a nutshell, for us, using technology is an end-to-end system that we have put in place, and we are seeing the results in Edo State.
Sure, and one does have to wonder how many countries can perhaps replicate that, just given the positive spins that you have been able to achieve in terms of monitoring teacher performance a lot better, and in terms of also ensuring that a lot more parental engagement does take place. So, Usman, we've heard a lot from what is presently happening in the region from the respective speakers who have represented a few countries there, and I'm sure that there's a whole lot more that yourself and your team are aware of just based on the research that you have done that informs your 3-year strategy to make things better in the education scene right now. What would you say, based on your observation, are innovations and interventions that can be scaled up?
When we look at from the supply side, we see that there are 3 main education service providers. One is obviously the state, and as I mentioned in my speech, when we look at today the public schools, what you see is classrooms that are overcrowded, teachers who are demotivated, and learning material that are missing or that are not appropriate. And therefore, if you put all those together, obviously the outcomes from the education system cannot be good. And the extreme side, you have the private sector, which is trying to bring some innovation in the education system, using technology, making sure that this education system is adapted to the economy and society need, but doing this at a very small scale. And then in between, you have the communities. They are trying just to fill the gap with teachers who are not always well trained. And this could, of course, pose many challenges for the society. From the demand side, the fundamental challenge that we do see is the demographic challenge. The second, of course, there is a need from the market. We get this type of feedback from many investors, but of course, we don't have the graduate from the system that respond to their need. So in terms of what needs to be done, therefore, to respond to this regarding innovation. First, as colleagues have mentioned in their presentation, the fundamental crisis the system faces is learning crisis, learning loss. But if we mention this, we have automatically to look at this from teaching crisis as well. If the learning is in crisis, it's because the teaching method and teachers, how they are selected, how they are trained, how they are deployed, all those things are in crisis. So definitely teachers have to be at the center of what needs to be done. And there are some very good examples. Once again, in a small, it's relatively small. We have seen this in Benin, in Senegal, and as Vice President of Ghana has mentioned, there are also some good examples here. The second is the technology. Definitely, technology has a potential to accelerate, to innovate, but also to equalize the opportunities for us. Because the big danger that we do see in the education system today in Africa is this inequality. So there are some good examples also in that regard. They need to be amplified and multiplied as we go. The third element is transparency and traceability. Transparency in resource allocation, in resource management, both financial resources and human resources, but also traceability. You need to make sure that when resources are allocated, there is a mechanism that allow the government and the other partner to see where they are going to. And financial resources going to the education system should be seen in terms of impact in classroom and for people who are in charge of managing the education system. Transparency also in terms of evaluation. I think Mamadou has mentioned the critical importance of evaluating learning, but also those who are providing learning services. So again, there are some good experience in Africa, but from around the world that can be also replicated in Africa. We do have a number of new programs that are trying to bring those in the support that we are providing to countries.
I come from a country where we are spending enough on education, probably a lot more than in other parts of the continent. South Africa, we're spending enough, but the problem is we're still not attaining the ideal education outcomes. And it's for a whole host of reasons. And one of those reasons is the efficiency of the spending and the quality of the spending. So Minister Ofori-Atta, I was just wondering, sir, how Ghana is dealing with that, ensuring improved efficiency of spending on qualification, on education, such that the money that you are directing is actually achieving the outcomes and it's not being lost or leaked in the system. From the system, what are some of your interventions of improving educational spending?
Very good question, because as we have to make choices, and there are so many things for us to do: education, health, infrastructure, etc. And even as we continue to invest, there are still some 6 million or so people that we still have to find means of taking care of. And then you also have a pyramid where you may have about 6 million people in primary schools, and by the time you move to JHS, SSS, and tertiary, you end up with maybe 100,000 at the top. So the question becomes, what happens to all those people who fall between the cracks? And with limited funding, and I want to thank the World Bank because there's some great guidances in the work that they have done that we should be able to use for the intervention. But it comes down to really, in a sense, our public financial management system to be able to look at the medium-term expenditure plans and also the discipline in budget execution, and to be able to tell, especially through our GIFMIS system, that's a Ghana Integrated Information Financing Information System, exactly how these resources are deployed. And the need for the Ministry of Education, Ghana Education Service, to constantly re-examine, reimagine, and understand the importance of this renaissance for these resources to get to as many people as possible. The issue of digitalization becomes important because then you will know where the resources are going and how best to reward and also bring grants in. I think at this juncture, we, as a society, should also be decentralizing a lot more so that the districts have a lot more control as to the outcomes and the use and an ability to monitor the teaching and the students and the results. And those are going to be very important. So data collection and therefore digitalization, as Edo State has done, enables us to be able to be more surgical about where the resources are going. For example, sometimes there's an outcry in Ghana that the senior high school free education service is too expensive and we should cut it. And the question becomes, whose child should be cut off? But more importantly, is it just a means testing of the parents, or the child has an inherent right as a citizen to be educated, irrespective of whether the parents are behaving or not behaving? So those are fundamental questions we need to ask. But truly, in the end, the ability through technology to understand exactly how the resources are being used and to be able to move resources to the more deprived areas. So these 6 million people I talk about 40% may be in the northern 5 regions, and therefore how do you reallocate resources to make sure that they have adequate allocations to ensure that there's equity in the deployment of the pedagogy, equity in the resource flow, equity in terms of technology that goes there. So Ghana is straddling all of these so that the money goes a much longer way than it is. I think another aspect is also to encourage the corporates to be able to participate either through charter schools, etc., so that other people may be brought to bear in the educational system.
So, ma'am, Minister Gay, you spoke about the picture at the primary school level. Lots of good things are happening there in Cameroon, and secondary, lots of room for improvement there. But I'd like to talk about a tertiary and now what happens to these kids who go into the workforce. It was mentioned in your report, so you highlighted the skills mismatch presently, and I think that this is a challenge that's quite common in most parts of the world, whereby the graduates that are coming out of the system, the education system, are not or do not possess the skills that the workforce requires. And so how are you looking at this bigger picture in terms of ensuring that the graduates that do come through your pipeline are ready and do possess the skills that will make them relevant for the workforce, ma'am?
Cameroon is has a very peculiar situation. I should emphasize that. It's one of the most diverse countries that we have in terms of linguistics, in terms of the social and political conflicts that are going on in the country. It makes it very, very diverse in terms of customs, I know we in Africa, all of us have that, especially as it affects women. You know, the girls are not, some of them are not going to school, most of them are not going to school. It's only recently that, recently we also signed a circular that forced all the women to remain in school even when they got pregnant, that they are not sent away from school because they are pregnant. So there is a lot of what you call diversity. And yet the vision for secondary school is that everybody, every graduate should be socially integrated, every graduate should be bilingual, and every graduate should have a skill which is important for the growth of the country. And what the government has done, first of all, we have a law which states that there are two systems in Cameroon, English speaking and French speaking. So that is a given, and everybody has to respect it. Now, when you respect that, how does that help then in the education? What has happened is that we have had to transform a lot of the schools into bilingual schools, a lot of the technical schools into technical bilingual schools, a lot of technical schools into technical bilingual schools as well. You know, so that makes it possible for us to bring our graduates up to par. And of course, now the question is, how do you make them have the skills that are necessary for development? And what we have done is the development that we are doing today is distance education. Distance education is seen as a solution to the problem that we have. It is not just because of COVID. We started distance education as a result of the effect of COVID. And we have now seen that COVID or no COVID, distance education solves problems. And so we do that. With distance education comes the collaboration between the secondary education and tertiary education. And in tertiary education, who also have a very large distance education capability, are going to be the ones to train the secondary school teachers.
Your recommendations on the challenge around the language of instruction, how long you teach children for in a language that they understand, when you switch them to languages that are spoken outside of their regions in the rest of the world, what's that appropriate switch for you, sir?
Now, the native language of the child, if properly used, can be used as a transitional model, the native language of the child. That is to use the native language to facilitate the initial learning process as a transition, whilst the actual language of instruction is progressively introduced in order for the child to be at par with the teachings before completely resorting to the language of instruction, that is English or French. The main challenge that we have in our country is that the early models or the models for early education are not sufficiently adapted to the reality. And because the language of instruction is alien to the children, it's neither the mother tongue nor the father tongue. Models that accommodate the transition achieve better results than the models that go straight to the use of English or French as a medium of instruction. Even though that model requires a little more time, factoring the period of transition of the use of local languages. It is also very key because it helps to develop the mind, the brain work, or as it were, of the child, especially in early education, and help the child to conceptualize what is being taught faster because the child relates more easily with his or her native language in that early education phase than English or French, which is quite alien to the concept development in the early childhood stage. It is therefore key that we adopt this in order for the transition from that early childhood stage to the normal teaching system with the English or French be a seamless one in order for the child to have a better concept of what is being taught. These approaches are considered as the best, but unfortunately, most countries don't adopt that approach, and that in the long run diminishes the efficacious nature of what we seek to impact on the children. Another issue is how to come out from experiential approach to the generalization approach. And here we observe that most countries in our region are still at the experiential stage, and years upon years upon years, and oftentimes we are experimenting models and assessing the models in a positive manner, and because we lose sight of the model that was adopted, we quickly go and take in a new model without ensuring any transition. And here there is a major challenge, because how do you assess a model that was giving the expected results in terms of the improvements in results from the teachers, and how do we leverage on these positive results and upskill? Of course, the upskilling, of course, always has its challenges. What succeeded in one particular administrative region with one particular language may not be the same results in another administrative regional area. So the issue of context to ensure the success, and how can we replicate that concept in another given context with its peculiarities in the same country or even in another country, is quite a daunting task. And the decision to generalize does not really get to where it ought to be, because normally after assessing a model, we should be having the political decision in order to popularize the model that finally was chosen. So on one side we have the technical problem that comes with upscaling, and also the problem of political will, which is also a hindering. So these are also two teething issues that need to be taken into account.
On a à la fois un problème technique de mise à l'échelle qui peut être résolu techniquement, mais il y a aussi le problème de la décision politique qui ne vient pas. Ces deux problèmes restent en ce qui concerne la question des langues.
Dr. Jan, so they say that the next crisis is around the corner. I don't know if it's a catchy phrase that we use in the media, but it just speaks to the importance of preparedness for whatever may be coming next. Some are saying perhaps it's climate change. I saw a video where there's an individual who walked out of the door labeled 20, walked into a door of 2022, which represented the crisis of monkeypox. Touch wood, that will not be our fortune. But in the event that we do need to prepare a lot better for any next crisis that may disrupt the education and the learning process, can you draw from your experience and the lessons learned in dealing with the pandemic's disruption that you think can be replicated in the event that something else does and is waiting for us around the corner? So just at tertiary, at primary and secondary level, minimizing disruptions from external forces that when they land seem beyond our control but are disruptive to the learning process. what are your lessons just based on how you did deal with the disruption of the pandemic?
Migrate to online learning by launching Adobe at home. Because of system, the systems and structures we already had in place, we already use education and to do but it was set to go online. If we have a clear understanding of what we are trying to do, how we want to deliver quality education, and the type of quality education we want to deliver, and there is a synergy between the Ministry of Education, the various boards of education that are implementing the various levels, basic, secondary, TVET, and tertiary education, that it is possible to surmount some of these unforeseen challenges. For those that were not able to utilize technology during the pandemic, particularly those in the rural areas and in areas that are not currently linked to our network grid, we had to come up with alternative options for them, alternative offline options. I think for us in Edo State, what has been working for us largely is the political will of the governor. He has the political will, he has the vision, he has the understanding, and so he's the catalyst that pushes us to continue in spite of challenges of infrastructure, in spite of challenges of funding, that whatever it is that we have, we are able to think about how to maximize it. And so since COVID-19 and the lessons we've learned, we have been quite fortunate that going forward, if we continue to coalesce all the available resources, whether financial or material, we will continue to strengthen our system. It has been an incredible learning experience for us to see how our teachers were able to, very quickly before I end, just to give a sense of how much they did during the pandemic. We have a little over 9,000 physical classrooms. And during the COVID shutdown, our teachers were able to set up 7,000 virtual classrooms. And in 1 month, we had over 1 million hits on our website.
I hope you heard. That's a lot. I would give you a round of applause for that. Yeah. A very interesting conversation we are having this one, particularly with the colorful sound that's involved. But nonetheless, if this was a WhatsApp group right now, it's about to get dismantled because we're coming to the end of the conversation. So very soon, all of us will have to leave this WhatsApp group. And you've been sitting here next to me, writing all kinds of notes, highlighting all kinds of things on your pages just based on the exchanges that the esteemed panel has been making. So I'm really interested in what's in your mind right now and the final contribution you'd like to make just based on what everyone has presented so far, sir.
Thank you very much. 3 years ago, the net commitment in our region for education portfolio was a little bit above $1 billion. Today, we are at $3.2 billion, almost 10% of our total commitment for all the sectors. Our intention in 3 years is to double this amount so that we'll be close to 20% of our portfolio. And we hope that in collaboration with the country, we can get there. And the intention, obviously, and the goal is to make sure that we support the country to have inclusive, quality education for all, meaning an education that will allow the children and the graduate, obviously, to be equipped with the skills and the attitude to be responsible citizens, but also productive citizens in support of the society that evolves and also economy that is evolving and adapting. And we are optimistic because we have seen some good examples. And I will share with you some examples based on what I have observed during my field trip in countries. Indeed, Governor has just mentioned in Nigeria, we have the Edo BEST program that is rolling out script lesson to make them available for all children, but also introducing technology. We do have the Agile, which is also actually supporting girls and to make sure that they are empowered in order to make sure that they can make decisions by themselves in education system and when they graduate. I was in Cameroon recently, and with the Minister of Education, we visited school, and I was impressed to see internal displaced children are integrated in the education system in Cameroon, and therefore making the school at the very early stage to contribute for a more cohesive and tolerant society. In Mauritania, there are more and more female teachers and principals in school that create the condition to have more girls in education system, not only to be there, but also to be retained and to continue until the secondary through the higher education. Senegal has invested a lot in early child development, and also in the higher education, they have a new institute, sometimes with just 2 years or 4 years of training, but all the graduates will have the skills to respond to the need of the economy. In Niger, there are boarding schools, especially at the secondary level, that will allow girls to have the skills and competence, again, as I mentioned, for Nigeria, to make a responsible decision, and that therefore, decrease the early marriage and create the condition for women empowerment. I can go on and give some good examples in the country. But again, as Mamadou has said, sometimes those experiences are for a relatively short time, and there is no mechanism in place to sustain them and to make them producing lasting results. I think this is what needs to be addressed. But this is my very last point. We have mentioned this morning in several occasions the challenges the education face in Africa, West and Central. Sure. But there are also a number of very good examples, and it's important to celebrate those examples. Ghana is clearly a country where this type of examples are too many. Share them. This is one of the objectives of gathering. Right? We don't have always opportunity to have Minister of Education from the country at the same place with African country to discuss among themselves, to this type of peer learning, so that good example also can be known and replicated wherever it's possible.
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, sir. I'm excited. I'm excited about what is happening in this space. I'm excited about the plan that has been placed on the table for the World Bank. But of course, we have heard the importance of making sure the plan is implemented, and it is a whole society and community approach, bringing all stakeholders on board, and specifically ramping up the level of private sector investment right now by providing a better enabling environment at national level, and most importantly, political will. But ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for your patience and being with us. That brings to a close the end of this discussion. Please help me thank my panelists for their time with a warm round of applause. Thank you.